The Dancing Plague of 1518. In the city of Strasbourg, an event began that would forever enter history as one of the most mysterious and terrifying occurrences of the Middle Ages. Hundreds of people, from children to the elderly, began to dance uncontrollably on the streets. It all started in the summer of 1518, when a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped out onto the streets of Strasbourg. What initially seemed like strange behavior, one woman dancing quickly turned into uncontrollable chaos. She wasn't dancing out of joy or merriment. No, her movements were uncontrolled, as if an invisible force had possessed her. At first, people watched in amazement, not understanding what was happening. But within a few days, others joined her. 2, 3 dozens of people. With each hour, the number of dancers grew. People were drawn to the streets as though some unknown force was compelling them, and they could not stop. And this was just the beginning. The city watched in horror as the dancers didn't stop. They danced day and night, their feet bleeding from the stones, their bodies exhausted. But they could neither stop, nor did they want to. This wasn't a celebration. It was not a party. Some danced for hours, others for days. Reports began to surface that people were dying from exhaustion. They danced until they lost consciousness from heart attacks, strokes, and physical exhaustion. By the end of July, more than 100 people had been affected. By August, that number had surpassed 400. The number of victims grew, and the madness spread. The authorities in Strasbourg were in despair. They didn't know what to do. At first, they tried to calm the dancers by bringing in musicians, hoping that music would help. But instead, it only worsened the situation. Even more people joined the dance, and the movements became even wilder. But this was not an isolated incident. Europe at the time was enduring famine, epidemics, and the general instability of medieval life. People were struggling to survive, and death was always nearby. The unfortunate dancers were caught in a whirlpool of extreme stress and fear. Could this have been a manifestation of a mental breakdown? Constant pressure to survive, combined with a belief in divine retribution, could have caused a mass hysteria. After the Black Death and the constant fear of it, such an event could have been an explosion of collective consciousness. Some believed the dancers had been poisoned by ergot, a fungus that grows on damp rye and contains substances similar to LSD. After consuming contaminated bread, hallucinations and seizures could occur. Could this have been the cause of the wild dancing? Other historians believed it was a mass psychogenic illness. In times of intense fear, entire communities can experience similar physical symptoms, even without an actual disease. This phenomenon is known as mass hysteria, and it has occurred multiple times throughout human history. Some believed it was the wrath of Saint Vitus. In medieval Europe, anything unexplained was seen as a sign of God's anger. People were convinced that Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics, had cursed the city, and the only way to stop it was to dance until the end. The dancers themselves believed it was Saint Vitus's curse. The authorities of the city were helpless. In despair, they called in doctors, but they had no remedies. Their verdict? Hot blood. They recommended bloodletting, a popular treatment at the time, but it did no good. What did the authorities do? They built a stage, brought in more musicians, and encouraged the dance, hoping it would bring relief. But it only worsened the situation. More people danced and more people died. Eventually, the authorities intervened. Music was banned. People were urged to stay indoors, but it was too late. When it was all over, the epidemic left traces of death. Some had danced for weeks until their bodies gave out. Some died from heart attacks or strokes. Some simply never stopped. The true cause of the dancing plague of 1518 remains a mystery. Was it a disease, a psychological epidemic, or something darker? This enigma still haunts historians. What really happened in Strasbourg in 1518? Perhaps we will never know. But one thing is certain. The people of Strasbourg danced until death freed them. 1518, Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, became the site of one of the most mysterious and terrifying events in human history, the Dancing Plague. It was an epidemic that forced hundreds of people to dance non-stop until they lost consciousness and even died. But what caused this horrific event? How did these people take to the streets and not stop? And why has this phenomenon remained unexplained and still raises questions among scholars? In July of 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea began dancing on the streets of Strasbourg. At first, it appeared to be strange behavior, a woman dancing for no apparent reason. But it quickly became clear that this was not just dancing. She danced without tiring, without a clear goal, as if she were enchanted or compelled by some unknown force. More people joined her, and within a few days, the number of dancers grew to dozens. Not only women, but men, the elderly and children began dancing. They could not stop, and the dance did not bring them joy. On the contrary, it became more agonizing and exhausting. People began to collapse from physical exhaustion, from the pain in their bodies, from their feet being covered in blood, yet they could not stop. This dance lasted day and night. No one could explain why they danced or why they couldn't stop. The authorities were in despair. Their attempt to calm the people by bringing in musicians only worsened the situation, as more and more people joined this uncontrolled dance. By the end of July, more than 100 people had become victims of this terrifying phenomenon. With each passing day, the number of victims increased. By August, more than 400 people were caught up in this dance. They all danced non-stop until they collapsed from exhaustion. Heart attacks, strokes, or even brain hemorrhages. The city authorities didn't know what to do. The doctors they consulted couldn't offer any advice. Some said the cause was hot blood, a popular medical theory of the time. Others believed it was some kind of divine punishment. All of these assumptions could not explain why people could not stop dancing. There are several main theories regarding the cause of the dancing plague. One suggests that people could have been poisoned by ergot, a fungus found in moldy rye. This fungus, known as ergot, contains substances similar to LSD. People who consumed contaminated bread might have fallen victim to hallucinations and seizures, which would explain their uncontrollable behavior. Another theory is that this was a mass psychogenic illness. That is, people could have experienced similar symptoms due to fear, stress, and collective hysteria. The situation in Strasbourg was extremely tense, and the constant fear for survival during times of famine and epidemics might have caused people to experience the same physical symptoms without an actual illness. Another belief was that this was the manifestation of the wrath of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and those suffering from epilepsy. It was believed that medieval people thought such phenomena were signs of divine anger. There was even a belief that the dancers were cursed, and their task was to dance to their deaths in order to free their souls. Despite numerous attempts to stop the dance, the authorities were powerless. They even built a special stage for the dancers and invited more musicians, thinking it would help. But this only worsened the situation. More people joined the dance, and the number of victims grew. When it finally ended, some dancers had danced for several weeks, until their bodies were no longer capable of moving. Others simply collapsed and never got back up, dying. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new interesting stories.